Let's look at the cans. The larger group, we'll look at them first. The Bible lists them first. Even though they had seen God work in different ways, the Cants chose, mind you, I've underlined that in this morning's outline, they chose not to exercise faith in the providence of God. Does that sound familiar? Do we ever choose not to take a chance on faith? I have. This is an attitude that spread like wildfire in Los Angeles. I want you to look at Numbers chapter 14, verse 1. I want you to see this attitude of we can't accomplish this spread from 10 people into millions, thousands at the very least. And all the congregation raised a loud voice, or raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, and listen to this, if this isn't a whiny's attitude, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and little ones will become prey. Would it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Really? You want to go back into slavery? You've got to be kidding me, folks. But this is the attitude. You see how it began with an attitude, oh, we just can't possibly do this. Into an attitude of despair to the point where they're ready to go back and say, put the chains on. I'll be your servant again. You really think that's going to happen? You know, when we're looking at things in life and a reason not to trust in God and His ability to see us through a project that is clearly His will, we can always find a reason not to. I mean, seriously. Well, it's just not the right time in my life. Really? I've got to get some things set in order. Well, we could go on and on with legitimate reasons not to do what God tells us to do. Is it really worth it, though? Do we really want to go back into slavery? The Apostle Paul says sin is slavery. If we fail to follow God, that's going back into slavery. Now let's look at the cans. Let's look at those who can overcome. Those who can do what God asks of them. We've got Joshua and Caleb. Again, looking at it from the other direction, Joshua and Caleb went into this land. They went into Canaan. They spied out the land of Canaan. They saw the same fortified cities. They saw the same massive people. They saw the same armies. So if they saw all the same things, what's the difference? Joshua and Caleb made their decisions based not on what they saw physically. They made their decisions based on what God expected of them, what He wanted them in spite of the obstacles, in spite of the difficulties, in spite of the challenges, they said yes, where the others said no. They said, yes, God can do this. They said, yes, we are capable. The others said no. You ever say no to something that you know God is wanting out of you? It's easy to do. Isn't Joshua and Caleb, isn't the attitude that they had the very definition of faith? I want you to go back here for a minute. Hebrews chapter 11, before we get into this next slide here, I want to pause. We'll probably look at this a little bit later on, but I want you to look at Hebrews chapter 11. The very definition of faith is taking action without being able to see the outcome. In Hebrews chapter 11 and in verse 1, the Hebrew writer says, now faith is the substance, or the assurance, as the ESV says, of things hoped for. The conviction of things not seen. Caleb and Joshua couldn't see the outcome. They saw the same obstacles, but they made a determination based on their belief in God. And it wasn't blind faith. They knew what God was capable of. They saw the plagues in Egypt. They lived with the frogs. They came through the plague of death. They walked on dry ground through the Red Sea. But so did the other 10. It has been said that the devil is in the details. You've heard that before, I'm sure. Well, I want to argue that point. Satan is not in the details. If you look at how Satan works, Satan is certainly not in the details. Satan tries to gloss over the details. Look with me at Matthew chapter 7 for just a moment. Matthew chapter 7, I want to look at verse 14 of Matthew chapter 7. Actually, let's back up into verse 13. Jesus says, enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the way, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. And those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. You see, this is exactly what's taking place before our very eyes in our study in the book of Numbers. I want you to go down just a little bit, same chapter, to verse 21. When we're looking at the definition of faith and defining faith, I think Jesus does a fabulous job right here. Jesus says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. There are hundreds of people, thousands of people, I dare say millions of people in the world today who believe in God, who believe in Jesus, and are willing to acknowledge Him as Lord. Verbally. But Jesus says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. I ask you back in our study of the book of Numbers, who is willing? Who is willing to do the will of God in the book of Numbers? God says, I am giving you this land. Who is willing to accept that blessing? Caleb and Joshua. Caleb and Joshua were willing to accept the blessing that God said he would give them. Who is willing to accept the blessing of eternal life? The one who is willing to step out on faith and be obedient to the will of God. In the Gospel of John, chapter 8 and verse 32, it is my belief that to know the truth is what actually frees a person from the bondage of sin. And knowing the truth means knowing the difference between righteousness and sin. Jesus says in John chapter 8, verse 32, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Caleb and Joshua knew the truth. And they were, even though they couldn't see the outcome, even though there were obstacles, they were willing to say, if God is with us, who can be against us?